Hello. If you are not yet asleep tonight, then I invite you to come with me. You don't need to bring anything, just a blanket warm enough, a light soft enough, and a mind curious enough to journey through divided sleeps, hunted dreams, persecuted souls, and the echoes from history that have not yet faded. You can lie on your left side, place a pillow behind your back, or turn on a fan to mimic the sound of an ancient forest wind. Don't worry if your eyes are still open, because in the next few minutes, history itself might close them for you. We will begin in a dimly lit room in the Middle Ages, where people did not sleep through the night, but in 2 shifts. And waking up at midnight was not to check a phone, but to check if the goat was still in the yard. Then, we will glide toward the burning torches of Salem, where a nightmare could become a death sentence just because a name was whispered in the dark. After that, you will meet a Roman woman. Not a goddess, not a victim, a politician, a warmonger, a powerful phantom named Fulvia, who wrote letters for her husband, led troops for her father, and fought for all women who were forced into silence. And then, when the world seems to have awakened, we will step into Washington in 1963, under the harsh sun and quiet hope, where a speech changed history, a dream that did not come in the night, but was spoken in broad daylight, and is still waiting to be awakened. From the straw pillow of the Middle Ages to the screams at the Salem gallows, from the bloody letters of Rome to the footsteps on the avenues of Washington, it all began with one night and one dream. Now please lie still. Breathe in slowly. And let me tell you about the people who dreamed for you, and sometimes died for it. Imagine you were living in the 14th century. No alarm clocks, no LED lights, no memory foam mattress with a cooling gel layer. Only the night. Thick, cold, and so silent that the faint whimper of a cat echoes like a church bell. In the Middle Ages, sleep did not last for 8 hours, as we are advised in modern times. Instead, it was split in 2. An ancient biological rhythm called segmented sleep. After the sun went down, earlier than we think, people ate a simple dinner, extinguished their lights, if they had any, then lay down on a pile of straw or a mattress stuffed with dry leaves, and entered their first sleep. This was the first 3 to 4 hours of the night, deep, heavy, sometimes filled with dreams. Then they woke up, intentionally, not because of insomnia, but because it was the schedule. The time between the 2 sleeps was called the watch. In the darkness, tiptoeing across thatched roofs and through the whistling wind at the door cracks, people got out of bed. Not to check messages, but to pray, read the Bible, tend the fire, or check on the goats in the yard. Some use this time to talk, to make love, to gently knock on each other's hearts in a quietness that the day did not allow. Medical books of that era advised that this was the best time for intimacy, because the body was rested, the mind was calm, and perhaps, most importantly, both were too tired to argue. After about 1 to 2 hours, people returned to bed, or rather, to the sackcloth stuffed with grass, and slept again. The second sleep lasted until the rooster crowed, or the monastery bell woke them to start a new day. And so, the night passed like a pair of old shoes, worn at both ends, but still warm enough. Segmented sleep was completely normal. Even Chaucer, the great writer of that time, mentioned it in his poetry. It was not a sign of a disorder, but a part of a world without electric light. Today, modern sleep science has looked back at this model with surprise. Perhaps this is the natural way humans sleep, when not disrupted by artificial light messing with our melatonin cycle. Waking up at 2 a.m. is not a failure of the body, but possibly a call from our ancestors. So, if one night you find yourself tossing and turning in the middle of the night, eyes open, heart unsettled, please don't blame yourself. Just close your eyes. Whisper, "Ah, the ancestors' watch has come." Then gently walk to the kitchen, make a cup of tea, and check if the cat is still in the house. Do you remember the bed you are lying on now? How soft is it? How comfortable? Now, try to imagine you have to sleep on a pile of straw. Not fresh, fragrant straw from the field, but straw that has endured a few cold nights, clumped together with sweat, breadcrumbs, and even the paw prints of stray cats. Welcome to the medieval bed, where being picky meant you were still alive. In European villages, a bed was not furniture, but a means of survival. They called it a pallet, a mattress stuffed with straw, dry leaves, or anything that was once alive and no longer moved. If you were lucky, you could put it in a worn-out sackcloth. If not, just spread it directly on the cold dirt floor. Your sleeping spot was also where the cow sat this afternoon. Straw had its advantages: good insulation, easy to find, and extremely attractive to insects. You might encounter fleas, bed bugs, field mice, or even a migrating ant colony. At night, when something bit you, you didn't scream. You just turned over, closed your eyes, and prayed it wasn't venomous. If a family had a little money, or a back too sore to lie on the ground, they might place the straw mattress on a wooden frame. A real bed. But don't imagine an intricately carved wooden frame. It was usually just 4 rough wooden planks tied together with rope or rusty nails. The biggest benefit was you wouldn't be kicked in the face by a chicken at 4 a.m. As for blankets, most were thick canvas. If you were poor, you used old clothes. If it was too cold, you used your siblings. The duvet of that time was a real person. Pajamas? They didn't exist. People slept in their day clothes, including their shoes. It wasn't out of laziness, but because shoes were hard to lace, clothes were thick, and the floor was too cold for bare feet. Bathing? It depended on the season. Washing clothes? A luxury. Sometimes your own smell was what protected you from mosquitoes. And in that setting, dreams still came. Not because it was comfortable, but because they were exhausted. Not because it was quiet, but because there was no other choice. People dreamed to the sound of chickens breathing, of rain falling through the straw roof, of a mother fanning her child to sleep. In the same room where grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes even the dog slept together. Privacy did not exist, but the feeling of living together was the most beautiful dream. Meanwhile, in distant castles, nobles slept on feather beds, with carved wooden frames, draped curtains, and blankets embroidered with gold thread. But don't be too envious. Lice and bedbugs did not distinguish between classes. Those beds were so valuable. They were listed in wills. No one left land, but they left Aunt Matilda's lumpy feather bed, a treasure filled with dust, memories, and occasionally a strange snore from under the mattress. For the common person, a warm sleep, without drafts, without itching, without being crushed by a chubby cousin, was a luxurious dream. And since no one could forbid you from dreaming, people just closed their eyes and hoped. Maybe it was the hope of not being woken up by a cow kicking them in the face. Maybe it was the hope that the straw would stay dry, or simply the hope that, despite being poor, cold, and tired, they would wake up the next morning and see the sun rise again. Do you wear a hat to bed? It sounds strange in the modern world, where pillows must be breathable, blankets just right, and the head left to breathe naturally. But in the Middle Ages, a sleeping cap was not a joke. It was a survival device. They called it a nightcap. Not the glass of whiskey you drink to help you sleep today, but a real cap, made of linen, wool, or anything warm enough to keep your head from freezing on a bone-chilling night. Remember, houses back then had no insulation. A straw roof breathed like a field, and stone walls absorbed moisture like a sponge, and windows, if they existed, were just a thin piece of stretched animal skin or a dusty sheet of oiled paper. The wind entered the room as if it were invited. So, keeping your head warm at night was not just about comfort, it was about survival. And so the nightcap was born. Long, pointed, sometimes dangling to one side like the tail of a dozing ferret. Some looked quite goofy, but looking goofy was better than waking up feeling like your brain had turned to stone. Men wore hats to keep warm. Women wore hats to preserve their virtue. Yes, for wives, a nightcap was sometimes a symbol of morality. In many parts of Europe, married women had to cover their heads even when sleeping. It wasn't just a custom, but an unspoken rule of decency. Not wearing a hat to bed? Don't be surprised if you were invited to confession the next day. Some caps were even embroidered with lace, trimmed with thread, or adorned with fur. Because in a world without silk nightgowns, adding trim to your cap was a way of saying, I still have style, even if I'm sleeping next to a chicken. Accompanying the cap was a nightshirt, usually a long, wide tunic, gray or dirty white. Much like Ebenezer Scrooge's attire in A Christmas Carol. Not sexy, not dreamy, but extremely practical. It covered everything that needed covering, retained the last bit of the day's heat, and prevented insects from getting where they shouldn't. The poor had no caps, no nightshirts, nothing but the day clothes they wore. Sometimes torn, patched in many layers, smelling of kitchen smoke, earth, and a little bit of goat. As for the rich, they had embroidered nightcaps, lace-trimmed nightgowns, and private bedrooms without chickens. But they also had expensive bed bugs. So, in the end, everyone itched the same. Different classes, but the night was more egalitarian than we think. And if you're curious, people back then didn't call them pajamas. The word pajama has Persian roots and only spread to Europe after the 17th century. Before that, people simply slept in what they were wearing, put on a cap, wrapped themselves in more cloth, and hoped they wouldn't catch a cold by morning. An interesting fact: if you knocked on someone's door at night and they opened it with a nightcap on, it was a clear sign they didn't want to talk. No "do not disturb" sign needed. The cap was the message. A cap, a sleepy look, and you knew. It was time to retreat. There you have it. A nightcap. Small, ugly, silent. But in the cold night of the medieval world, it was the silent crown of the survivors. If you think modern roadside motels lack privacy, then try booking a room at a medieval inn. No need to book on an app. Just show up, knock, and wait to see if you're allowed to squeeze into someone else's bed. Yes, squeeze into a bed. Literally. With strangers. Because in that era, A bed wasn't reserved for you, but for anyone who arrived first and had room to lie on their side. Medieval inns operated like spontaneous public dormitories. No single rooms, no private bathrooms, no minibar, and especially no concept of privacy. Are you a merchant on your way to a fair? A pilgrim heading to a monastery? A farmer lost after dark? Welcome to a shared bed. You might end up sleeping between a snoring monk and a sleep-talking blacksmith. Completely random. The more it resembled a lottery, the more authentically medieval it was. An inn bed could hold from 2 to 4 people, depending on the size of the bed and the patience of those already in it. Someone once said, "An inn bed is not divided by gender, but by the thickness of one's wallet." Sleeping with strangers wasn't weird. It was the norm. Sometimes it was even safer than sleeping outside with the wolves. Guests usually tied their money pouches around their waists, hid them under their clothes, or slept hugging their luggage, resting your head on your bag, not because it was comfortable, but so that if someone rummaged through it in the middle of the night, you would wake up to the sound or the pain. Personal security, hugging your belongings. And if you think at least people were polite, well, not really. Snoring, teeth grinding, flailing, convulsing, dreaming of demons, kicking the person next to you, all were standard customer experiences. Some inns were so large they looked like collective barns, where you would sleep in a vast room, beds pushed together, bodies separated by prayer and luck. Gender? It depended. Some inns tried to classify guests by profession. Blacksmiths slept with blacksmiths. Monks slept with monks. Thieves? They found each other. But mostly, first come, first served. Latecomers squeezed into a corner. You might end the night with a strange foot on your chest, a half-delirious whisper in your ear, and a feeling that this bed had witnessed things you didn't want to know. And strangely, that was still a luxury option. Because if you couldn't afford an inn, you would sleep in the stables, in a warehouse, or simply on the side of the road, curled up in your cloak, praying the dew wouldn't kill you before dawn arrived. Someone once said, "It's better to sleep with strangers in an inn than to sleep alone with death." And in an age where a cold night could kill you before the good night wishes were even spoken, that was not a metaphor. Do you pray before you sleep? In our time, that sounds like a gentle habit, a tender ritual to soothe the mind, like a cup of herbal tea or a quiet piano piece. But in the Middle Ages, praying before sleep wasn't for relaxation. It was to prepare, in case you never woke up again. Going to sleep, in the eyes of the ancients, was a temporary journey away from the body. Your soul, fragile and vulnerable, would wander in the darkness. And during those hours, if demons were lurking, if the fires of hell opened up, if fate had arrived, then you, though still alive, might never return. Therefore, medieval people did not simply sleep. They committed their bodies to God. They lay down with their last words on their lips. And the prayer before sleep was the shortest will of a lifetime. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. A simple, sweet, and haunting line. It sounds like a lullaby, but a lullaby for the dying. Children were also taught to pray, not because it was cute, but because you might not be here tomorrow. Parents didn't soothe their children to sleep with the promise that tomorrow will be better, but with the words, "Sleep now, child. The angels are watching over you. Comforting, isn't it? Until you realize that angel wasn't guarding against nightmares, but against demons. For the more devout, monks, nuns, pious nobles, the night was the hour of compline, the last prayer of the day. After that, they entered the great silence, which lasted until dawn. No words, no laughter, no arguments, because the soul was passing through twilight. Talking too much might cause it to lose its way. Some recited dozens of prayers, one for forgiveness, one for their enemies, one for those who died yesterday, one for their own soul. Others just whispered, "Lord, if I sleep, please keep me. If I die, please remember I existed." Even the most stubborn, blacksmiths, mercenaries, town prostitutes, would at some point bow their heads on the straw, close their eyes, and whisper something. Not because they feared God, but because they feared the space between sleep and waking, in a place where disease lurked in every cough, where fire could erupt from an untended hearth, and nightmares were considered windows for the devil. Sleeping without praying was like going into battle without armor. It was said that night was when demons were most active, because they were defeated by the light of day. And if you slept alone, you were the first target. So people prayed, not just for forgiveness, but to keep their souls tucked safely under their pillows. And so, in cramped shared rooms, on rough straw piles, under tattered straw roofs, prayers murmured like insects. Not loud, not beautiful, but very real. It was the last blanket a medieval person could wrap around their soul before stepping into the darkness. You may have been afraid of dreams, but for them, dreams were real. A place where gods appeared, a place where demons tested you, a place where the soul was laid bare. Dear friend, have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, heart pounding from a strange dream? You knew it was just a dream, a fleeting fear, then it vanished with the morning light. But if you lived in the late Middle Ages, especially in New England in the 17th century, that dream could kill you. In an age where the line between reality and dreams was blurred, dreaming of the devil was evidence. Not evidence that you were scared, but evidence that the devil was inside you. In 1692, in Salem, Massachusetts, young girls began to scream, convulse, and speak gibberish. And when they came to, they said they were attacked by witches in their dreams. The names of neighbors, teachers, the shopkeeper, were uttered, trembling, choked, as if a nightmare still lingered on their lips. And just like that, the court was in session. No one needed to see you casting spells, brewing potions, or laughing like a black cat on a rooftop. All it took was for a child to say they dreamed of you riding a broomstick. It was enough for you to be handcuffed, put in the stocks, and await trial. And the strange thing is, they truly believed it. Not just the townspeople, but the judges, the pastors, even those considered intellectuals. Because for them, a dream was not imagination. It was metaphysical evidence. In the doctrines of the time, sleep was when the soul temporarily left the body, like a slightly open door between humans and the spiritual world. And if the devil could squeeze through that door, then the dream was where the crime occurred. A woman named Sarah dreamed of blood flowing from her pillow. She was arrested the next day. A boy dreamed of an old woman turning into a crow and flying into his chest. And the nearby widow was hanged. They even had a term for this kind of trial, spectral evidence. Does it send a shiver down your spine? When dreams themselves, once a place where people sought meaning, met loved ones, and conversed with God, were turned into weapons. No physical evidence, no confession, no living witnesses. All it took was for a child to say they had a dream, and you would never dream again. The medieval night was not silent. Don't let the tranquil images in old paintings fool you, because when the candles went out, the sounds came to life. The sound of mice gnawing on wood, the hoot of an owl in the fields, called the cry of a tormented soul, the whistling of wind through a door crack, which, to children, was the laugh of a witch, and above all, the sound of your name being called. Medieval people believed that if you heard someone call your name in the middle of the night, but saw no one when you looked, it was your soul being summoned. There were legends about knocking at midnight. One knock, a relative is dying. 2 knocks, a lost soul. 3 knocks, death is counting its steps to your bed. A dog howling at 2 a.m. was considered an omen of death. A cat scratching a wooden wall, a sign that a witch has come to visit. People even rearranged their beds to avoid lying in a north-south direction, believing it was the path souls took to the cemetery. The elderly told stories that when you heard slow footsteps in the yard, counting each step, but saw no one, it was the ancestors visiting. Some families left bread and a cup of water on the windowsill, not for wanderers, but for passing ghosts. The sounds of the ancient night were not just physical phenomena. They were messages, whispers from the other world. And if you listen closely, between the hum of your fan and the ticking of a modern clock, who knows, you might hear a knock too. You're still not asleep? That's fine, because the most terrifying things often come when people think they are safest. Are you ready to step into Salem? And that is where we will go next. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692, where a strange dream of a little girl drove an entire village mad. Chapter 2, Salem's Nightmare. Once upon a time, in a faraway land that people called the New World, there was a small village named Salem, nestled on the edge of a dense, ancient forest. At that time, it was still a colony of distant England. From a distance, Salem was a picture of peace. Quaint little wooden houses, porches covered in white snow during winter, and plumes of evening smoke rising from the chimneys. The people here lived a simple life, working in the fields by day. And every Sunday, they would gather at the church to listen to sermons about God, about heaven, and also about the devil. They were a devout people, always believing that hard work and faith would protect them from all evil. But the old forest beside the village was not always silent. Sometimes, the wind blowing through the leaves created ghostly whispers. The darkness in the deep forest was thick and dense, hiding mysteries that no one dared to explore. The people of Salem both respected and feared the forest. They believed that in its darkness, unseen forces were lurking, waiting. That fear, like a seed, lay dormant deep in their minds, just waiting for a harsh winter to sprout. And then, the winter of 1692 arrived, a winter colder than any before. The snow fell heavily, blanketing every road, trapping the villagers in their wooden houses. The days were short, and the nights were endless. In the frightening silence of that winter, something strange began to stir. not from the forest, but from within the very houses that seemed the warmest. It all began in the kitchen of Reverend Samuel Parris. Outside, the winter wind was howling, but inside, his daughter Betty Parris and his niece Abigail Williams were trembling from a different kind of cold. Not the cold of the snow, but a cold from the depths of their souls. The girls, who were normally healthy and cheerful, suddenly began to act strangely. They started to let out piercing screams that no one could understand. Their bodies convulsed violently, as if being pulled by an invisible string. Sometimes they would crawl on all fours on the cold floor, growling like wild animals. Then they would moan and cry, speaking of ghosts and strange figures that only they could see. The entire village of Salem was terrified. Their parents watched helplessly as their children suffered. Doctors were called in, the wisest men in the village. They examined, they observed, and they shook their heads in confusion. The medicine of that time could not find an explanation for these horrifying symptoms. Common illnesses could not cause such scenes. And when reason failed, primal fear began to speak. There was only one explanation that the devout people of Salem could think of. An explanation passed down from generation to generation, whispered in late-night stories. Witchcraft. People began to question the girls. Who did this to you? Who is causing you pain? In their delirium, amidst the screams and convulsions, the first names were uttered. The girls claimed that when they slept, the spirits of certain people in the village had entered their dreams. In that hazy world, these people appeared, tempting them, forcing them to sign their names in the devil's book with their own blood. The first to be named was Tituba, a female slave of African descent in Reverend Parris's household. She was the one who told the children stories of magic and voodoo from her distant homeland. Perhaps that was why she was suspected first. Next was Sarah Good, a poor woman who often begged for alms. And then Sarah Osborne, a sickly old woman who rarely attended church. From 3 names, the list began to grow. Each day, the girls would see more spirits in their torment. The fire of suspicion, lit from a dream, began to spread rapidly through the cold winter night of Salem. It turned close neighbors into enemies, turning the tranquility of the village into a death sentence being written. And then, a trial was held. But this was no ordinary trial. It took place in a hazy space where the light of truth could not reach. A trial built in the darkness of fear and fanaticism. Just try to imagine it. In the stuffy courtroom, the air was thick. The accused, mostly women, stood there trembling, their faces pale with fear and confusion. Opposite them, the girls continued to scream and writhe. They pointed at the pitiful women and shrieked, "It's her! Her spirit is pinching me. I see her standing next to the judge, whispering in his ear." The only, and also the most powerful, piece of evidence was spectral evidence. All it took was for one of the girls to say, "Last night, I dreamt she turned into a black cat. She sat on my chest, making it impossible for me to breathe." That was enough. Those words, though only from a dream, carried more weight than any truth. No physical evidence was needed. No other witnesses were required. The testimony of a child in a hysterical fit was considered the voice of God, an undeniable truth. And once you were accused, there was no way out. It was a perfect trap, a loop with no exit. If you bravely stood up and denied all accusations. They would say, "The guilty always deny their guilt. Only the devil is so stubborn." If you chose to remain silent, hoping silence would protect you, they would conclude, "She is silent to cast a spell, to hide her crimes." And if you burst into tears out of injustice and despair, your tears would also be interpreted in the cruelest way. Those are crocodile tears, the tears of the devil. There was no way to win, no way to prove your innocence. Death seemed to have been decided from the moment your name was called out from a dream. The trial was not to find the truth, but only to confirm a verdict already written in everyone's mind. The atmosphere in the village grew heavier and heavier, like a nightmare that everyone believed to be real. In this tragedy, there was a strange thing. Power was not in the hands of the judges, the ministers, or the respectable men. Power had suddenly fallen into the hands of children. The very girls, once considered innocent and pure, became the center of all attention, the ones who decided the fate of an entire community. They stood before the court, their eyes wide, their voices sometimes trembling, sometimes sharp. They pointed at a neighbor, an aunt, a family friend, and described the spirit that only they could see. They told of yellow birds, black beasts, and ghosts whispering temptations. The entire courtroom held its breath to listen, and every word they spoke was believed as absolute truth. Who would dare to doubt the word of a child? Who would dare to say they were lying or imagining things? That person would immediately be considered an accomplice of the devil, an enemy of God. The innocence of children had become an impenetrable shield, and also the most terrifying weapon. Centuries later, looking back, historians have tried to find the answer. Who was really behind the darkness of Salem? What happened to those children? Some suggest it was a phenomenon of mass hysteria. Starting with a few children with psychological or health problems, the panic spread like an epidemic. Other children, out of fear or a desire for attention, began to imitate them. Another theory suggests that behind the innocent accusations were the schemes of adults. There were neighbors who had personal grudges, now using the words of children to take revenge. There were families who wanted to compete for land and property, and this was the easiest way to eliminate a rival. The children might have just been repeating the whispers they heard from their parents during dinner. But all those explanations came too late. When you are trembling in the dark, when your name is called out by a convulsing child, when the only accusation comes from a dream, all reason becomes meaningless. The village no longer slept peacefully. The children had become the ones who never slept, and their eyes watched everyone, sowing fear in every dream. The first death in the Salem nightmare was that of a woman named Bridget Bishop. She wasn't exactly a witch from a fairy tale. She was just an older woman, living alone, and perhaps a little different from those around her. She liked to wear bright red clothes, something quite unusual in a community accustomed to black and gray. She ran a tavern where people gathered, sang, and sometimes had arguments. She had outlived 2 husbands and had a strong personality, not afraid to speak her mind. It was this difference that made her a target. When brought to trial, she denied all accusations emphatically. "I am innocent," she said. "I know not what a witch is." But her words were drowned out by the screams of the girls. They said her spirit had tormented them, and that was enough. Bridget Bishop was convicted and became the first person to be hanged on Gallows Hill. Her death was a warning. Denial could not save you. But perhaps the most tragic and bizarre story belongs to an old man named Giles Corey. He was over 80 years old, a healthy farmer, but also known for being stubborn. When his wife, Martha, was accused of being a witch, he stood up to defend her, and then he himself was dragged into the vicious cycle. When he stood before the court, Giles Corey did something no one expected. He refused to answer. He did not plead guilty, but he did not plead not guilty either. He remained completely silent. According to the law at the time, if a defendant refused to be tried, they could not be convicted and hanged. But silence was also a crime. And so, they used a brutal medieval punishment to force him to speak. They took him to a field and placed a large wooden board on his body. Then, one by one, they piled heavy stones onto the board. They wanted to crush his silence. They asked, "Do you plead guilty?" Giles Corey remained silent. More stones were piled on, the weight pressing down on his old chest. "Do you plead not guilty?" Giles Corey still remained silent. It is said that in his final agony, the last words he uttered were not a confession, but a simple request: more weight. He had chosen an agonizing death to preserve his honor and to ensure his property would not be confiscated, so it could be passed down to his children. He died for refusing to speak. In Salem, the only crime was sometimes just not sharing the same dream as the crowd, and even silence could be hanged, or rather, pressed to death. The nightmare spread wider and wider, like an uncontrollable oil slick. From a few people, then a few dozen, the number of accused reached over 200. The village jail, meant for a few petty thieves, was now packed. The air in the prison was damp, foul, and cold, filled with silent sobs and desperate prayers. In total, 20 people were executed. 19 were hanged on Gallows Hill, where the wind always blew fiercely, like the wailing of wronged souls. And one man, old Giles Corey, was pressed to death with stones. Among those who were lost were some very young, only 13 years old, their lives extinguished before they had a chance to bloom. Faced with certain death, many chose to confess, even though they were completely innocent. They stood before the court, repeating the words the judges wanted to hear, admitting they had danced with the devil, had flown on broomsticks. That false confession was the only ticket to keep their lives, as it was believed that a repentant witch did not need to be executed. But the price was that they had to live the rest of their lives in shame and torment, bearing a stain that could never be washed away. Many others could not endure it. The pressure of torture, of absurd accusations, and the constant fear pushed them to the brink of madness. They truly came to believe they were possessed by the devil, their minds shattered. Others slowly died in the filthy prison from disease and starvation, even before being brought to trial. The entire village of Salem was submerged in an all-encompassing fear. It was the fear of going to sleep. When night fell, people dared not close their eyes, because no one knew if, in some little girl's dream, their name was being called. No one knew if, when the sun rose the next morning, they would be the next to be named, to be dragged from their home amidst the cries of their family. During the day, being awake was also a trap. A certain look was deemed an evil eye. A casual word was considered a spell. Neighbors grew suspicious of each other. Friends turned their backs on one another. Families were torn apart. The longest night in Salem did not last just one night. It lasted for many months. A long night of delusion and fear, where being awake or asleep were both hell. Every nightmare must eventually end. But in Salem, the end did not come from an awakening of conscience. It did not come because people suddenly realized the absurdity of it all. It ended, ironically, because it had spread too far. The fire of fanaticism, after burning through the weak and the different, began to lick at the highest echelons of society. The accusations began to target the wealthy, the merchants, the respected ministers, and even the wife of the governor of Massachusetts, Lady Mary Phipps. When the devil no longer distinguished between the rich and the poor, when it dared to step foot into the mansions of the most powerful, people suddenly stopped believing. The judges began to hesitate. The officials began to feel uneasy. If even the governor's wife could be a witch, then who among them was safe? Skepticism, which had been suppressed for so long, began to reemerge. Governor Phipps, perhaps partly out of concern for his wife, intervened. He ordered the special court in Salem to be dissolved. He no longer allowed the use of spectral evidence. And just like that, the nightmare abruptly vanished. The remaining people in prison were gradually released. The accusations no longer held weight. The accusing girls also fell strangely silent, returning to their normal lives as if nothing had happened. The fog of delusion that had covered Salem for a year finally lifted. But when people awoke from their stupor, what did they see? A devastated village, families who had lost loved ones, fields left untended, and a shame, a scar that would never heal in their history. The living were free, but the dead, no one could wake them up again. They were forever lost in the sleep of an unjust death, all because of a collective nightmare, a wild dream that the entire village had believed to be true. The story of Salem has now receded into the past, as distant as a whisper in the night. That small village taught us a great lesson about how dangerous fear and fanaticism can be. It reminds us that sometimes the most fearsome demon does not hide in the deep forest or in dreams, but it lies right within the human heart. Now, close your eyes. Let the story of Salem come to a close. Let the ghosts of the past rest in peace. The night is now peaceful, and there are no accusations ringing out there. There's only silence and safety in your room. Take a deep breath and drift into your own sleep. A peaceful sleep, free of nightmares. Sleep well. From the dreams of being judged in Salem, we return to the east of the West, a place where love is also a battlefield, and the women who do not sleep are the ones who write history. Chapter 3. Fulvia. Love letters written in blood. Imagine you are in the bedroom of a Roman aristocrat. The air is thick, carrying the scent of olive oil burning slowly in exquisitely carved bronze lamps. Their flickering, golden light dances on the cool stone walls, creating long, strange shadows, as if the gods themselves on Mount Olympus were leaning down to watch. On the floor, a thick, soft Persian rug swallows every footstep. The low, wide bed is covered with layers of soft swan feather mattresses and smooth linen sheets imported from Egypt. From the window, which has no glass, only heavy silk curtains, a night breeze wafts through, carrying the moisture from the Tiber River and a distant, vague sound. If you listen closely, you might recognize the growl of starving lions in their cages, or the echo of the crowd from the Colosseum, even though the gladiatorial games ended at sunset. That sound is a constant reminder of the nature of Rome, a mixture of extravagant beauty and primal violence. Blood and wine, silk and swords, all exist in a single breath. In rooms like these, under warm blankets, the nobility do not just dream of lavish feasts or glorious conquests. No, they do not sleep. They scheme. Sleep is a luxury that only the naive can fully enjoy. For those who hold power, the night is a time to plan, to forge alliances, to eliminate enemies. Every shadow is a potential spy. Every whisper through the stone walls could be a death sentence. And in this world of ambitious men, women were assigned a default role. They were living statues, virtuous wives, gentle mothers. Their image was imprisoned within the framework of obedience and submission. By day, they managed servants, wove cloth, and smiled charmingly at banquets. But when night fell, when their powerful husbands had sunk into a deep sleep after a long day of politics and wine, some of them did not sleep. They did not sleep, not because of insomnia or nightmares. They did not sleep because they were working. They were thinking. Sometimes, the one who does not sleep is the one who controls the very dreams of the empire. And none of them did it more fiercely and terrifyingly than Fulvia. Fulvia was not a name one could easily ignore. Throughout her life, she married 3 men, and each of them was a powerful politician, a mover and shaker in the Roman political scene. Publius Clodius Pulcher, a dangerous populist; Gaius Scribonius Curio, a brilliant orator; and finally, Marcus Antonius, the famous general and part of the Second Triumvirate. She was not just their wife. She was their political partner, their strategist, the fire that fueled their ambitions. In a society where women were expected to stay behind the curtain, Fulvia tore that curtain down and strode onto the stage. She was famous for never retreating from the political arena, even when the bravest men had to step back. When her first husband, Clodius, was assassinated on the Appian Way, Fulvia did not weep in silence. She brought his bloodied body to the Forum, displayed his wounds for all of Rome to see, and with her fiery speech, she incited a riot that burned down the Senate House itself. That was Fulvia, a woman who turned pain into a weapon. When the Roman night fell, Fulvia's room was not a place of rest, but a war room. While Marcus Antonius, her last husband, might be sleeping soundly after endless battles or parties, Fulvia was wide awake. The oil lamp in her room illuminated a face of intense concentration, her eyes burning with a fire that never went out. She wrote letters, her delicate fingers, usually adorned with gold rings and precious gems, now tightly gripped a stylus, carving sharp words onto a wax tablet. These were not sentimental love letters. These were orders, instructions to loyal legion commanders, threats to political rivals, detailed plans to collect taxes, recruit soldiers, and consolidate power for her husband. She ran the affairs of Italy while Antony was in the East. She became his voice, his will, and in many cases, more ruthless than he was. The guards outside her villa often whispered to each other in the flickering torchlight. They did not speak of her beauty or grace. They spoke of something else. They said that when Marcus Antonius took off his armor to sleep, it was Fulvia who put it on. It is Fulvia who wears the armor when her husband sleeps. That phrase spread through the legions, through the markets, and crept into the corridors of power in the Senate. It was not a compliment. It was a fearful acknowledgement of an abnormal power, a power that followed no rules. In Fulvia's world, sleep was not merely a biological need. It was a political act. To sleep was to be at your most vulnerable, unguarded, lost in a world you could not control. Enemies could attack, allies could betray, and opportunities could slip away. By refusing sleep, Fulvia refused weakness. She seized the hours when the rest of the world was dreaming to forge her own reality. The saying, "When Roman men sleep, women write history," was not just a slogan. For Fulvia, it was a way of life. She wrote her history with ink and blood in the silence of the night. Her power became legendary, and with it came stories, woven both to admire and to sow terror. It was rumored that after Antony's greatest enemy, the orator Cicero, was executed, his head and hands were brought back and displayed in the forum. Fulvia, in a cold rage, went before the head. She did not just look. She pulled out the tongue of the man who had used words to attack her husband, and with her golden hairpins, the ornaments of a noble lady, she pierced it through, again and again. A horrifically symbolic act. She had permanently silenced her enemy, even after his death. Another story told that she had carved the names of her family's enemies onto the swords of her bodyguards, so that every time they drew their blades, it was not just a strike, but an act of personal vengeance. Are these stories true? Perhaps they were exaggerated in whispers, embellished by fear and astonishment, but their existence is more important than their authenticity. They reflect a deeper truth, the fear of a patriarchal society towards a woman who dared to stay up late, dared to think, and most terrifyingly of all, dared to command. A woman who did not need a man to tell her what to do. Fulvia was the embodiment of that fear. She was the nightmare of those who believed women belonged only in the bedroom and at the loom. Power, like love, is a fragile thing. The fire of Fulvia's ambition had helped lift Marcus Antonius to the heights, but it also began to scorch their own relationship. While in the east, Antony fell into the arms of another woman, one whose power and charm were even greater than Fulvia's, Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. The news of the political marriage between Antony and Octavia, sister of Octavian, Antony's rival, was a heavy blow. But the news of his passionate affair with Cleopatra was the fatal stab. Fulvia, the woman who had fought, schemed, and killed for him, was now left behind in Rome. She was not just politically betrayed, she was discarded like an old possession. Rage, humiliation, and excruciating pain merged, creating a tempest in her soul. She would not accept this in silence. She would not retreat to live the life of a spurned wife. If Antony had forgotten her, she would do something to make him never forget. She would make the whole world speak her name again. And so, Fulvia did the unthinkable. Taking advantage of the discontent of the people and the legions, she started a war. A rebellion against Octavian, her husband's ally enemy, but in her heart, it was a message sent to Antony himself. It was her final love letter. A letter not written with ink on papyrus. It was written with fire and blood. The ink was the blood of fallen soldiers. The paper was the ravaged fields and cities of Italy. Every captured city, every battle fought, was a sentence, a word in her desperate message. Look at me. Look at what I can do. Do not forget me. It was the final rebellion of a woman who refused to sleep quietly in history. An act so bold, it was insane, driven by a broken heart and a bottomless ambition. She gambled everything on this final bet, not to win Rome, but perhaps just to win back the heart of one man. No matter how bright, every fire eventually dies down. Fulvia's rebellion, though it initially caused much trouble for Octavian, was ultimately defeated. Her army was besieged and crushed at Perugia. The city was burned to the ground, and her dreams turned to ash. Fulvia failed. She was exiled to Sicyon, a remote city in Greece. Everything she had fought for was lost. She lost her army. She lost her power. She lost the empire she had helped build. And most painfully, she lost her husband. Antony, when he met her again, offered no comfort. He only blamed her for causing the troublesome war. She had lost herself. The woman who once made all of Rome tremble was now just a lonely ghost, living in exile and coldness. The fire in her eyes had faded, leaving only the embers of bitterness and regret. She died there, a quiet death, far from the political battlefield where she had once been queen. But the story does not end there. When the Roman night falls, when the winds whisper again through the ruins of the Forum, people still speak her name, not as a gentle wife, nor as a romantic lover. They speak of her with apprehension, a little fear, and perhaps a little secret admiration. They remember her not for her love, but because she was the dream that Rome dared not sleep through again. She was a warning to all powerful men that even in the most seemingly peaceful bedrooms, a fire could ignite and burn everything down. In the darkness of the empire, there are souls who refuse to sleep. They write, they love, they resist. Fulvia did not die as a noble wife. She vanished like a whisper in the bloody dream of Rome. She is living proof that history is not only written by generals on horseback or senators in session. History is also written in sleepless nights by women who were considered weak but possessed an iron will. Her sleep had ended, but her story had not. It became a part of the Roman night, a smoldering fire in the memory of the empire. Fulvia was dead, but her insomnia was not. It survived her death, turning into an invisible legacy, a cautionary tale whispered among the aristocracy. After Fulvia, the powerful men of Rome probably looked at their wives with a different eye when night came. They would wonder, behind those closed eyes, in the silence of the room, what dreams were being woven. Was it devotion, or were they conspiracies waiting for the right moment? The name Fulvia became a code, not just for ambition, but for a terrifying kind of power. The kind that could rise from the very place considered safest, the home. She proved that the darkness of night was not just for rest, but was also a battlefield, where the quietest battles could determine the fate of an entire empire. But there is an undeniable truth. Fulvia's choice to forsake sleep was a privilege. She had a feather bed to leave, wax tablets to write on, soldiers to command. Her insomnia was a weapon she actively chose to fight for her power and her love. It was a purposeful sacrifice, and it was that privilege that created an invisible but profound boundary between her and the millions of other people in Rome. Fulvia could dream because she had the right. She could turn her sleepless nights into acts of power, but millions in the Roman night did not dare to dream. Their sleep did not belong to them either. They were slaves, shadows, nameless stone pillars supporting the dreams of others. And in their darkness, dreams took on a completely different form. Chapter 4: The Sleep of Slaves. when dreams are not your own. From Fulvia's fiery bedroom, where the scents of incense and silk entwine in a space of luxury, we do not step out onto the balcony to gaze at the moon over Rome. Nor do we enter the library, where scrolls filled with knowledge and poetry lie slumbering. Tonight, we will go down, descending the cold steps, where the air grows thicker and damper with each step. We are descending into the cellar of the empire. This is a place where power is not symbolized by a crown or a scepter, but by chains and silence. It is a place where sleep is not a natural choice for a weary body, but a temporary mercy that is bestowed. And here, dreams are a luxury reserved for the free. Whose bed is it? The question sounds so simple. The bed belongs to the one who lies upon it. But here, in this suffocating darkness, the concept of whose was stripped away long ago. Nothing is theirs, not their bodies, not their time, and certainly not the place where they lay their heads. Look there, in the vast kitchen of a stately mansion, where the fire in the hearth has died, leaving only glowing embers like the eyes of a beast in the night. The stone floor is still warm. That is the most valuable bed a few of the household's trusted slaves can have. They lie curled up, like dogs seeking warmth, listening to the crackle of dying embers and the whistle of the wind through the cracks in the door. No blankets, no mattresses. Their daytime work clothes, stained with sweat, grease, and dust, are their only covering. They lie there, right next to the spot where they cook and clean by day, where they are scolded and ordered about. Their sleep is merely a brief continuation of their servitude, right at the scene of their labor. Step out of magnificent Rome and into the Ville Rusticae, the vast farms in the countryside. Here, sleep is even more stark. The resting place for agricultural slaves is a corner of a warehouse, a section of a livestock stall. Their bed is a pile of dry straw, which yesterday might have been feed for the horses. The smell of human sweat mingles with the stench of cow manure, the musty odor of straw, and the cold scent of the earth. They lie beside the animals that at times are more valuable than they are in the eyes of the master. The death of a strong plowing ox is a great loss. The death of a slave, a few sestertii will buy a replacement. So they lie there, listening to the herd chewing its cud, to their heavy breaths in the night. Occasionally, an animal shifts, nudging them. That contact holds no affection, only the shared confinement of creatures trapped in the same space. Their bed is not just straw or a feeding trough. It is the bitter assimilation with the very animals they tend. And then, in the darkest corners of the empire, in the mines of Hispania or the quarries of Aegyptus, the answer to whose bed is only a mournful echo from the rock walls. The bed is stone. It is the damp, jagged ground. It is the place they collapse after a day of breaking rocks and digging for minerals, from before sunrise until after sunset. Many of them are chained together, even as they sleep. They lie in a long line, like a giant, motionless centipede. The clanking of chains whenever someone stirs becomes part of the night's symphony. They sleep on the very thing that imprisons and exhausts them. When do they get to sleep? Not when they want to, but when they are permitted. When the overseer's bell rings, signaling the end of a day of labor. Their sleep is sandwiched between two bells, the bell that ends the day and the bell that begins a new one, often separated by only a few short hours. It is not a natural cycle of rest. It is a quantified pause, a temporary shutdown to recharge the machine before it must operate again tomorrow. A stone bed, a straw pile, a cold kitchen floor. These are not their beds. They are the places where the empire temporarily discards its tools after a day's use. Nightfall does not mean their humanity is returned to them. For a female slave in a noble household, the night only draws the curtain on a silent play in 3 painful acts. Act 1. Servant at dusk. As the last oil lamps in the house are lit, Lycoris's work is not yet done. She has just helped her mistress, Fulvia, bathe and change into her nightclothes. She has cleared the dining table, wiped up spilled wine, and collected the fish bones that the guests had thrown on the floor. Her body is in shambles. Her legs ache. Her hands are raw from hot water and kitchen ash. Now, she must sit in a corner of the hallway, outside her master's bedroom, awaiting the final commands. Lycoris, fetch me a cup of water. Lycoris, fan me. Lycoris, where are my slippers? She is a shadow that can hear, a pair of hands that moves at another's will. Her identity now is that of a servant. Act 2. Tool at midnight. Then, the bedroom door of the master, Marcus, creaks open. He does not call her name. He just signals with a nod of his head. Lycoris's heart sinks. She knows what is about to happen. She silently follows him into another room, empty and cold. Here, there are no words, no tenderness. She is no longer Lycoris, the girl who once lived in a village by the Greek sea. She is not a human being with feelings, with dignity. She is merely a tool for satisfying lust. Her body is a possession, used like a cup for drinking wine, a chair for sitting. In the darkness, she squeezes her eyes shut, trying to separate her soul from her body. She imagines herself drifting on the sea, returning to her village, to the smell of salt and the sound of waves. But the cruel reality always pulls her back. When it is over, he puts his robe back on and leaves, without a word, without a glance. She is left alone in the dark, a feeling of filth and emptiness clinging to her. Her identity now is that of a sexual tool. Act 3. Shadow at dawn. Finally, she is allowed to return to her sleeping place, a torn mat on the warehouse floor. But sleep does not come immediately. She lies there on the cold stone, listening to the steady breathing of the other slaves. The physical pain will pass, but the humiliation seeps into every fiber of her being. Who is she? The servant, the tool, or the Greek girl from a distant memory? The dark night merges all 3 identities into one, into a formless, faded existence. She dares not cry, for the sound might wake the overseer. She can only let the hot tears flow inward, searing her soul. By day, a servant. By night, a sexual tool. And in the deepest dark, she is just a silent shadow on the stone floor. Sleep, which should be a release, becomes the very moment she must confront all these imposed identities in their rawest form. The exhausted body of the servant, the defilement of the tool, and the homesickness of an exiled soul, all blend together in a fitful, unpeaceful slumber. When free people sleep, their minds are free to soar. They can dream of great journeys, of a passionate love, or simply of the lavish meal they will have tomorrow. A dream is a private, inviolable space. But for a slave, even that invisible space is usurped. They dare not dream, and they cannot dream. Their sleep is a ceaseless vigil. They sleep, but a part of their consciousness must remain alert. Imagine a sentry dozing on a watchtower. He still jerks awake at the slightest sound. The slave's sleep is the same. They must listen for the footsteps of the patrolling overseer. An unusual noise could be a sudden order, the baseless rage of a drunken master, or an unexpected punishment. They sleep with their ears pricked, like a wild animal in a forest full of dangers. Their sleep lies under the shadow of the whip. The pain from yesterday's beating still smolders on their backs. The fear of tomorrow's beating always hangs over their heads. In a state of half-consciousness, a shiver from the cold could make them startle awake, mistaking it for the sting of a lash. Their minds, instead of wandering in the world of dreams, are trapped in a loop of painful memories and constant fear. How can a soul, always on the defensive, relax enough to enter the realm of dreams? Dare not breathe too loud. Dare not turn over. This is no exaggeration. In cramped quarters, dozens of slaves lie packed together. A weary sigh could be interpreted as a complaint, a sign of discontent. Turning over too forcefully, accidentally bumping the person next to them, could make a noise and wake everyone. And any disturbance in the night could be seen as a disruption. The punishment could be for everyone. So, they learn to sleep in near-perfect stillness. They hold their breath, force themselves into a single position, trying to become a part of the floor, of the darkness. That silence is not peace. It is the silence of fear, like a mouse holding its breath when it knows a cat is stalking nearby. In this state of extreme physical and mental tension, deep sleep, REM, the stage where dreams usually occur, almost never arrives. Their sleep is shallow, fitful, and empty. It is just a dark interval between two stretches of labor, a void with no voice, no images, no dreams. Their minds are too tired to think, but too afraid to dream. Normally, sleep is a reward after a hard day's work. But in the world of slaves, sleep itself and the behaviors associated with it could become crimes, and the punishments were incredibly cruel. The crime of sleeping at the wrong time. Imagine a scorching summer afternoon in Campania. Davos, a young slave, is tasked with guarding the vineyard, chasing away birds. The sun beats down, the air is thick, and the cicadas drone like a lullaby. After many sleepless nights, Davis's young body cannot resist. He rests his head against a vine and dozes off for just a few minutes. It was a brief, sinful sleep. A flock of starlings descends, pecking at the ripe grapes. The overseer discovers it. To him, this is not a moment of weakness from a tired child. It is laziness, insolence, destruction of the master's property. The punishment is not just a beating. Davis is tied to a post in the middle of the courtyard, directly under the harshest sun. He is forbidden to sleep for a day, a night, and then another day. Whenever he stumbles, slumping from exhaustion, a bucket of cold water is thrown in his face, or a stick is jabbed into his ribs. Sleep, the very thing he accidentally committed, now becomes a burning desire cruelly denied to him. He must pay for a few minutes of slumber, with days of agonizing wakefulness. His world becomes a prolonged nightmare, his eyes wide open, but his mind muddled, hovering between reality and illusion. The crime of lying in the wrong place. A cold winter night. In the warehouse, the wind blows through the cracks, chilling to the bone. Irene, an old frail female slave who has spent her entire life serving on the farm, is racked by a cough. The dirt floor feels too cold. Seeing a pile of old burlap sacks in a corner, she drags herself over, hoping their softness and thickness might block the cold rising from the earth. She only wanted a little warmth, a little comfort for her old body. but that act was seen as taking liberties. "Who gave you permission to lie there?" the overseer roared when he found her in the morning. "Do you think you are the master with the right to choose your sleeping spot?" The punishment was designed to twist the knife in her crime. Irene was forced to stand for the entire next night. Her feet were locked in a heavy wooden block. She could not sit, could not lean. She had to stand on the very cold ground she had tried to escape. Every sharp pain in her swollen legs, every shiver from the cold, was a bitter reminder that even the smallest comfort was something she was not allowed to have. Sleep was controlled, not just in time, but in space. Lying in the wrong place, even by a few inches, was enough to turn a night of rest into a night of torture. Through such punishments, the masters were not just punishing an act. They were reinforcing a message. Your bodies do not belong to you. Your fatigue is not your own. Even your sleep belongs to me. I decide when you sleep, where you sleep, and if you violate my rules, I will take sleep itself away from you. Sleep, a biological necessity, was transformed into a tool of power and oppression. Sometimes, the greatest danger comes not from the outside world, but from the fragile world within sleep. It is where the deepest secrets can be exposed, and a dream of freedom can become a death sentence. In a mine in Dacia, the harsh conditions had pushed a group of slaves to the brink of desperation. Their leader was a Thracian warrior named Zibelthiordos, captured in battle. By day, he was a silent rock-breaking machine, but by night, in the thick darkness, he fanned the flames of hope in his fellow sufferers. Their plan was simple, yet audacious. On the next new moon, they would use their own pickaxes to take down the guards, seize their weapons, and escape into the rugged Carpathian mountains. It was a plan whispered from one person to another, in brief moments, free from supervision. It was the only light in their dark lives. It was the shared dream they built together. The night before the planned escape, tension and exhaustion had worn everyone down. Zibelthiordos, after mentally reviewing everything one last time, also fell into a short, dream-filled sleep. In his dream, he saw himself already free. He was running through the familiar mountains of his homeland. He shouted in his Thracian tongue, calling the names of his brothers. "Hurry, through the gate. The sun is rising." He had no idea that lying not far from him was another slave, a weak Syrian named Malchus. Malchus did not believe in the rebellion. He only believed in survival. He feared the revolt would fail and everyone would be killed. Hearing Zibelthiordos's dream talk, the gate, the sun is rising, Malchus understood they were signals for the plan. A cowardly but practical thought flashed through his mind. If he reported it, he might be rewarded, or at least spared. Silently, in the darkness, Malchus crept over to a dozing guard and told him everything. The Romans' wrath fell as swiftly as an avalanche, but they did not attack a rebellion in progress. They attacked sleeping men. Soldiers stormed the mine, torches and swords in hand. Zibelthiordos was dragged from his dream of freedom by a cold steel blade. He was cut down while still lying on the stone floor, his mind perhaps still soaring over the mountains of his homeland. The others in his group were also captured and executed on the spot. Zibelthiordos's dream had been stolen in the most literal sense. It was overheard, interpreted, and used as evidence against him. the dream of freedom had become the direct cause of his death. That night, the remaining slaves learned a terrible lesson. They had to control not only their words and actions, but also their dreams. But how can a person command their own mind not to dream? It was the final powerlessness, the most brutal violation. Their dreams, the one thing that seemed to be their own, could ultimately be discovered and punished. Listen closely. In the silence of the imperial night, if you press your ear to the ground, you might hear a collective whisper. It is not the wind. It is the echo of millions of forgotten souls. That whisper tells one final story, the story of the dreams they once had. We were not always shadows. I, the one stirring the soup pot in the kitchen, was once a warrior of a Gallic tribe. I used to dream of hunting a wild boar in the old oak forest under a silver moon. I dreamed of the sound of the victory horn and the feel of a heavy sword in my hand. Now, my hands only know the wooden ladle and the heat of the stove. I, the one combing my mistress's hair, was once a philosopher in Athens. I used to dream of endless debates under the shade of an olive tree, of Aristotle's logic and Plato's beauty. I dreamed of writing texts that would change the world. Now, I can only read the scrolls my master discards, and my dream has shrunk to not tangling her hair. I, the one weaving this linen cloth, was once a merchant in Palmyra. I used to dream of camel caravans stretching across the desert, of the scent of incense and spices, of the vibrant colors of silk from the east. My dreams were the color of sand and the green of oases. Now, my world is only the white of linen thread and the steady clatter of the loom. I, the one hewing stone in the mine, was once a father in Britannia. I used to dream a simple dream, to see my son grow up, to teach him how to fish, and to watch the white cliffs of our homeland with him. Now, I do not know if my son is alive or dead, and my dream is only the sound of breaking rock in eternal darkness. We used to dream. We dreamed of first loves, of families, of homelands, of our own gods. Dreams were the proof that we were once whole human beings. But then they came. They chained us, put us on ships, sold us in the markets. Every step of that journey was a piece of our dream being torn away. They took our names, our languages, our pasts. And when they had taken everything, they began to take our dreams. They turned us into laboring bodies, tools without memories. They wanted us to forget that we ever knew how to dream. But they did not succeed completely. Sometimes, in the rare moments of a deep, undisturbed sleep, a fragment of an old dream returns, a scent, a melody, a face, and it reminds us of all that was lost. It is both a sweet comfort and an unbearable agony. We used to dream before we were made into property. The nameless tomb keeper, a sleep no one disturbs. Before stories were carved in stone, before the names of pharaohs became immortal, there was Abydos. This was not just a city of sand and temples. It was an idea, a promise. To the ancient Egyptians, Abydos was where the soul began its final journey, the harbor where the bark of Ra bid farewell to the world of the living to enter eternity. The air here is thick with the scent of time, of incense that dissolved into the air millennia ago, and of a sacred silence. Under the scorching sun of day, the ruins seem to tremble, and when night falls, they exhale the cold of the desert, carrying with them the whispers of souls that never truly left. Amidst the grandeur of the temple of Seti the Warn, where exquisite reliefs recount the deeds of gods and kings, there is a forgotten corner. Here, There are no majestic columns, no colossal statues. There is only a small, humble chamber built of rough limestone blocks, its entrance sealed with an ancient mortar as hard as iron. It does not exist on any archaeological map, nor is it listed in any catalog of tombs. It is a secret buried by time. But the nomadic shepherds, whose hearts can hear the desert's pulse, call it by a name both terrifying and compassionate: the breathing tomb. They swear that on cold winter nights, if one presses a cheek against the ceiling stone, a faint warmth can be felt emanating from within. Others insist they have heard a sigh, as light as the wind skimming over a sand dune, a sound not of this world. For that reason, no tomb robber, no matter how daring, has ever dared to profane this place. They do not fear a curse, but the mysterious life that exists within a dead tomb. Our story begins during the reign of Pharaoh Seti I, a time when Egypt was at the peak of its power and artistry. Among the thousands of priestesses serving the gods, there was a young woman named Neferu. She possessed a beauty not meant to charm mortals, but to please the gods. Her dark eyes were as deep as a starless night sky, and her soul was as tranquil as the sacred lake in the temple. Neferu was no ordinary priestess. Ever since she was a child, she had a special ability. She could see the images in other people's dreams when she touched them. This ability was both a gift and a burden. The priests of the Temple of Osiris recognized her uniqueness and chose her for a most sacred role: the keeper of dreams, Ker Hemut. Her duty was to go to those on the threshold of death, from the noble officials in the palace to the poor farmers in their huts by the Nile. With her soothing voice and deep empathy, she would guide them to recount the last dream of their lives. The Egyptians believed that the final dream contained the entire truth of a soul, its secret sins, its unfulfilled desires, its unrequited loves. Neferu would record all of this on a special papyrus scroll, which would be burned in a solemn ceremony, so its smoke could travel to the underworld and be presented to Osiris. Based on this, the divine judge would decide whether the soul was worthy of rebirth in the eternal field of reeds, or if it would be devoured by the monster Ammit. To keep her soul pure, so as not to cloud the sacred messages, Neferu had to take a harsh vow. She would live as a virgin. Her heart would never belong to any man. She accepted this solitude as part of her destiny. Her life was a series of rituals, prayers, and conversations with souls departing their mortal coils. She was the one who saw them off, the one who listened, but never the one who lived for herself. Neferu's destiny changed on a stormy night. She was given a strange task: to go to the breathing tomb, to perform a final purification ritual, to dispel the rumors and fears of the populace. The priests believed the place was cursed and needed to be spiritually sealed forever. Carrying an oil lamp and ritual offerings, Neferu sought out the forgotten chamber. The air inside was cold and thick. In the center of the room was a simple sandstone sarcophagus without a single hieroglyph carving a name or title. It was completely anonymous. As she placed her hand on the lid to begin reciting the prayers, a strange sensation passed through her body. It was not the coldness of stone, but a profound sadness, a loneliness that had stretched for centuries. For the first time in her life, Neferu did not see another's dream, but felt a soul that was still awake. Curious, she used all her strength and a few tools to pry open the lid. Inside, among the discolored linen wrappings, lay the remains of a young man. Despite the passage of time, the features on the mummy's face still retained a handsome and proud look. Through forbidden ancient texts she had secretly read, Neferu realized who this was. It was Prince Cale, the rebellious son of a previous pharaoh. He had not defied his father for the throne, but for his beliefs. Cale believed that the path to the gods lay not in lavish ceremonies or massive tombs, but in the truth of the heart. He had openly challenged the power of the priests, claiming they had turned faith into a tool of control. For this blasphemy, Cale had received a punishment more terrible than death. He was placed under a cruel curse. His soul would be eternally chained to his decaying body, forever conscious to feel the passage of time, the gnawing of loneliness, and never have the chance of reincarnation. He was a prisoner in his own tomb. An infinite compassion welled up in Neferu's heart. She saw in him not a heretic, but a brave soul who had dared to seek the truth. That night, instead of performing the purification ritual, she sat down beside the sarcophagus and began to tell stories. She told him about the world outside, about the stars glittering after the storm, about the lotus blossoms that had just bloomed on the riverbank. And that was the beginning of a forbidden love. Neferu's life thereafter had two worlds. By day, she was still Kerhemut, the solemn and exemplary priestess who listened to the dreams of others. But when night fell, she became an ordinary woman, sneaking into the tomb to be with the one she loved. 7 years passed like a long dream. The relationship was nurtured by whispers in the dark. In the first year, she still kept her distance. She would only wipe the dust from the sarcophagus, telling vague stories about the gods as a way to soothe the terrifying silence of the tomb. In the second and third years, the dividing wall gradually crumbled. She began to share private matters, frustrations in the temple, small joys from seeing a child laugh. She saw him as a confidant, the only person in the world who would not judge her. In the fourth and fifth years, love had blossomed. She not only told stories, but also began to whisper her own dreams into his dead ears. "Last night I dreamed we were walking together in a field of reeds," she said, her voice full of affection. "You smiled at me, and for the first time, I saw the light in your eyes." By doing so, she had violated her most sacred vow, turning her duty into a personal act of love. By the 6th and 7th years, their love had become inseparably deep. She no longer saw a mummy, but the imprisoned soul of Cale. She touched the cold sarcophagus as if she were holding his hand. One moonlit night, she knelt, pressed her cheek against the stone, and spoke her fateful promise. "Cale, my love, if one day I die, please wait for me in the afterlife. In the green field of reeds, I will find you. But if I do not come, then please know that I am still here, in this darkness, dreaming of you." He could not answer, but Neferu believed he had heard, because for the first time, she felt a sense of peace radiating from the tomb, replacing the desperate sorrow. Her love had become the only light in his eternal darkness. But no secret can be kept forever under the eyes of the gods and the envious. An old priest, who had long suspected the change in Neferu's eyes, secretly followed her. One night, he witnessed it all, the scene of her whispering words of love to an anonymous sarcophagus. The truth was exposed. A shock wave spread through the temple, Neferu, the keeper of dreams, the symbol of purity, was in love with a mummy, a cursed heretic. She was dragged before the council of elders. They accused her of the most terrible crimes, communing with the dead, defiling the temple, and betraying her oath to Osiris. Faced with the angry accusations, Neferu showed no fear. She stood tall, her eyes looking directly at the priests. She did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, she defended her love. "My love is not a sin," she said, her clear voice echoing through the great hall. "I brought light to a soul imprisoned in darkness. I gave him dreams when the gods had stripped him of all hope. If that is a crime, then I am ready to accept it." Her defiance only enraged the priests further. They saw it as proof of madness and blasphemy. The sentence was passed, even crueler than Kale's curse. Neferu would be buried alive with the mummy she loved, to become a redemptive offering, so that their love would be buried forever in darkness. The procession that took Neferu to the tomb was silent. There were no trumpets, no wails of mourning, only the heavy sound of footsteps on the sand. Neferu wore her white ceremonial robes, her face strangely serene. She looked up at the sky one last time, taking a deep breath of the air of the living world. When they led her inside, she did not resist. She walked to Kale's sarcophagus, placed her hand on it, and smiled. "I am here," she whispered. The builders began their work. Large stones were rolled into place. Mortar was applied. The light from outside grew smaller and smaller, then became just a thin sliver. In the final moment, before darkness completely enveloped them, Neferu began to tell Kale one last dream. "I am dreaming," her voice rang out, soft and peaceful. "I dream that we are together, not in this tomb, but on a golden boat, floating on a river of stars. You are no longer an imprisoned soul, and I am no longer a bound priestess. We are just ourselves." The final stone was set in place. The chamber plunged into absolute darkness and silence. Neferu's name was erased from all records. She and her love were officially forgotten by the world. But the story did not end there. It survived in whispers. The guards who sealed the tomb swore that after the work was done, they could still hear Neferu's voice from within. Not a scream of terror, but the gentle tone of a storyteller. From then on, no one dared to break the seal of the tomb, not because they feared a curse, but out of a deep respect. They understood that within that darkness was not death, but a sleep guarded by love, a dream that never ends. They understood that some loves do not need sunlight or the world's witness. All they need is a small room, one to tell and one to listen. My dear friend, the story of Neferu and Prince Kale is a reminder that the greatest histories are not always carved on temple walls. Sometimes they are whispered in hidden corners, guarded by silence and compassion. So, if one night, as you are drifting off to sleep, you dream of an ancient stone door slowly creaking open, and a gentle voice invites you to step inside, do not be afraid. Perhaps it is only Neferu. She is just looking for a friend to continue telling her dream to. A dream so beautiful that not even death could ever awaken them from it. Sleep well, and if you dream, remember to cherish it, for every dream is a world, and who knows, in that world, a soul may be waiting to be heard.